The champagne tasted like lies. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, crystal flute trembling in my hand, watching my fiancé's fingers trace the curve of my sister's spine. They thought they were being discreet, tucked away in the alcove behind the ice sculpture, but I could see everything. The way Julian's mouth moved against Alina's neck, the way her hand fisted in his perfectly tailored jacket, the way they both smiled like they'd gotten away with something delicious. I should have been devastated, should have felt my heart shatter into the same fragile pieces as the reputation I'd spent 26 years building. But all I felt was cold, crystalline clarity. I'd been the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect socialite. And for what? So my politician fiancé could fuck my sister at our engagement gala while 200 of the city's elite pretended not to notice. The champagne flute shattered in my grip. Blood welled from my palm, bright red against my white Valentino gown, and for the first time in years I felt something real. Pain, sharp and honest and utterly liberating. "Miss Vance," a server appeared at my elbow, concern creasing his young face. "Are you all right?" No, I was done being all right, done being perfect, done being Seraphina Vance, the Ice Queen heiress who smiled through everything and never caused a scene. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady despite the blood dripping onto the marble floor. "Just clumsy." I handed him the broken stem and walked away, leaving crimson footprints in my wake. Julian and Alina were still entwined in their alcove, oblivious. The guests were beginning to notice, whispers starting like wildfire. My mother would be mortified. Good. I grabbed my clutch and headed for the exit, ignoring the concerned calls from family friends, the confused looks from the hired photographers. Let them talk. Let them speculate. I was done performing. The night air hit my face like a baptism. Cold, clean, washing away years of practiced smiles and perfect posture. I stood on the steps of the country club, blood still seeping through the cocktail napkin I'd wrapped around my hand, and pulled out my phone. There was a place I'd heard about in whispered conversations, the kind my social circle pretended didn't exist. A club where the city's underworld gathered, where danger and desire mixed in equal measure, where people went to forget who they were supposed to be. I'd saved the address months ago, on a night when Julian's carefully controlled affection had felt more like a business transaction than intimacy. I'd never thought I'd use it. I used it now. The cab driver gave me 3 separate warnings when I told him the address. "That's not a safe neighborhood for someone like you, miss, especially dressed like that." "Perfect," I said. The club was called Crimson. How fitting. It occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of place that didn't advertise and didn't need to. The line outside was a study in contrasts to the gala I'd just fled. Leather and ink instead of silk and pearls. Dangerous eyes instead of practiced neutrality. These people wore their edges openly, no apologies, no pretense. I should have felt out of place in my white gown and diamond earrings. Instead, I felt like I was finally arriving somewhere I belonged. The bouncer was massive, easily 6.5 feet of solid muscle covered in tattoos that disappeared into his collar. His eyes were an unsettling amber, too bright to be human. He looked me up and down with an expression that suggested I was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. "Private party tonight," he said, his voice a rumble that I felt in my chest. "Members only." I met his gaze directly, channeling every ounce of entitled confidence my upbringing had instilled. "I'm not here to join. I'm here to ruin myself, and I suspect your clientele would find that entertaining." His eyebrow rose. For a moment I thought he'd refuse. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Your funeral, princess." He stepped aside. The club's interior was a sensory assault. Low red lighting that made everything look like it was on fire. Music with a bass so deep it resonated in my bones. The air thick with sweat and smoke and something wild I couldn't name. Bodies pressed together on the dance floor, moving with an abandon I'd never allowed myself. And the people, God, the people, they looked like beautiful disasters, every one of them. scarred and tattooed and pierced, moving with a predatory grace that made my pulse quicken. These weren't the carefully curated socialites of my world. These were wolves in human skin, barely contained violence wrapped in leather and denim. I made my way to the bar, every eye tracking my progress. I could feel their hunger, their curiosity, their contempt for everything my white gown represented. The attention should have terrified me. It thrilled me instead. "You lost, Barbie?" The bartender was a woman with half her head shaved, the other half a cascade of purple and blue. Her arms were covered in sleeve tattoos, and her eyes held a hardness that suggested she'd seen things my sheltered life couldn't imagine. "Not lost," I said, sliding onto a stool. "Escaping." She studied me for a long moment, then smiled. It transformed her face into something almost kind. "First time here." "Is it that obvious?" "The $4,000 gown and the blood on your hand are pretty good clues." She reached under the bar and pulled out a first aid kit, sliding it across to me. "I'm Mila." "Sera," I said, unwrapping the makeshift bandage. The cuts weren't deep, just dramatic, story of my life. "Well, Sera, let me give you some free advice." Mila leaned in, her voice dropping low. "This place isn't like wherever you came from. The people here play for keeps. Whatever you're running from, make sure it's worse than what you might find in here." I thought of Julian's hands on Alina, of my mother's constant disappointment that I wasn't more charming, more accommodating, more perfectly polished, of a life spent performing for an audience that would never be satisfied. "It is," I said quietly. Mila nodded slowly, then poured me a shot of something that looked like liquid fire. "Then welcome to hell, darling. Try not to get eaten." I downed the shot. It burned all the way down, harsh and unforgiving and exactly what I needed. When I looked up, Mila was watching me with something like approval. "What are you really here for?" she asked. I considered lying, considered maintaining some version of the careful facade I'd worn my entire life. But what was the point? I'd come here to destroy Seraphina Vance, perfect daughter, perfect fiancé, perfect disappointment. "I want to do something unforgivable," I said. "Something that can't be undone or explained away or covered up by my family's PR team. I want to burn my old life to the ground." Mila's smile turned sharp. "And how do you plan to do that?" I turned on my stool, surveying the crowd. "I'm going to seduce the most dangerous man in this room, publicly, spectacularly, in a way that ensures every phone in here captures it and uploads it before I can change my mind." "That's ambitious." Mila's tone was carefully neutral. "And stupid, but I respect the commitment." She gestured toward the back of the club, where a roped-off VIP section overlooked the dance floor. "In that case, you want him." I followed her gesture and felt my breath catch. He sat in the center of the VIP section like a king, surveying his domain. Dark hair pushed back from a face that was all hard angles and brutal beauty. His body was massive, corded with muscle visible even through the black shirt he wore. Tattoos covered his arms, his neck, disappearing into his collar. His hands were scarred, knuckles that had clearly seen violence. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. Even from this distance, I could see they were wrong. Too pale, too predatory. They swept across the crowd with an intensity that made people instinctively move out of his sightline. "Who is he?" I asked, though some instinct already knew the answer would change everything. "Killian Vane," Mila said quietly. "They call him the Butcher. He runs the shifter syndicate in this city. Everything that happens in the Underworld happens because he allows it. He's brutal, honest to a fault, and completely without mercy for people who waste his time." Shifter, the word sent ice through my veins. I'd heard rumors, of course. Whispers about supernatural communities existing in the shadows of polite society. But I'd always dismissed them as urban legends, stories to frighten sheltered socialites. The way Killian moved suggested otherwise. There was something too fluid about him, too controlled. Like he was containing something massive beneath his skin. "He's perfect," I breathed. Mila grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Listen to me carefully. Killian isn't one of your society boys who'll be thrilled by a slumming heiress. He eats people like you for breakfast. If you go up there, if you try to play games with him, he'll destroy you in ways you can't imagine." I looked at her directly. "I'm counting on it." I stood before she could stop me, smoothing down my gown with hands that were surprisingly steady. Every eye in the club tracked my movement as I walked toward the VIP section. The crowd parted before me, their expressions ranging from anticipation to horror. The guards at the rope were even more massive than the bouncer outside. One of them stepped forward, blocking my path with a body that looked like it could stop a truck. "Private section," he growled. "I know," I said, meeting his amber eyes without flinching. "Tell your boss that Seraphina Vance would like a word." Recognition flickered across his face. The Vance name carried weight even in the underworld, apparently. Old money, political connections, the kind of influence that touched every corner of the city. He spoke into a radio, his eyes never leaving mine. A pause. Then, surprisingly, he unhooked the rope. "He says you can come up. But Princess, if you're smart, you'll turn around right now." "I'm not here to be smart," I said and stepped past him. The VIP section was darker than the main floor, lit by candles that cast dancing shadows across the faces of Killian's inner circle. They were all massive, all marked with tattoos and scars, all radiating the same predatory energy as their leader. They watched me approach with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open hostility. Killian sat in the center, sprawled across a leather couch like violence taking a break. Up close, he was even more devastating. His face was a study in controlled brutality, all sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it could take a punch. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, another traced his collarbone. His hands, resting casually on his knees, were covered in healed-over wounds. But his eyes, God, his eyes. They were ice blue, so pale they were almost white, and they held an intelligence that was somehow more terrifying than the obvious physical threat he posed. He looked me up and down slowly, thoroughly, like he was cataloging every weakness. When his gaze finally met mine, I felt it like a physical touch. "Seraphina Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "Come to visit the animals in their cage." There was contempt in his tone, but also curiosity. Like I was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve or destroy. I forced myself to stand still under his scrutiny, to not fidget with my gown or touch my hair. "I came to make a mistake." His eyebrow rose, the scarred one. "Elaborate." "I want to ruin my reputation," I said, proud that my voice remained steady. "Irrevocably, spectacularly, and I thought seducing you in front of everyone here would accomplish that nicely." Silence fell across the VIP section. The men around Killian shifted, some laughing, some looking murderous. One particularly massive specimen with more scars than clear skin leaned forward. "Boss, you want me to throw this bitch out?" His voice was more growl than words. Killian held up one hand, silencing him without looking away from me. "Let me make sure I understand. You walked into my club in a gown that probably costs more than most of these people make in a year, and you want to use me as a prop in whatever rich girl rebellion you're having." Put like that, it sounded insane. It probably was insane, but I'd come too far to back down now. "Yes," I said simply. Killian studied me for what felt like an eternity. Then, shockingly, he smiled. It was a dangerous expression, all teeth and dark promise. "What makes you think I'd be interested in being your cautionary tale, Princess?" "Because you're bored," I said, the words coming from some reckless place I didn't know I possessed. "You're sitting here surveying your kingdom, and it's all too easy, too predictable. Everyone's afraid of you, everyone does what you say, and none of it challenges you anymore." His smile widened, showing teeth that seemed slightly too sharp. "Perceptive." "So here I am," I continued, stepping closer despite every survival instinct screaming at me to run. "Offering to be a challenge, the perfect daughter throwing herself at the butcher. Imagine the scandal." "And what do you get out of it, besides the scandal?" I thought of Julian and Alina, still probably tangled together at the gala. Of my mother's perpetual disappointment. of a life spent suffocating under expectations I'd never agreed to. "Freedom," I said quietly. Something shifted in Killian's expression. The contempt faded, replaced by something more complex. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, bringing him closer to my level. "You have no idea what you're asking for," he said, his voice dropping lower. "What you're offering to walk into. This isn't your world, princess. We don't play by your rules down here." "Good," I said. "I'm done with my rules." He stood then, unfolding to his full height. He was even bigger standing, easily 6'3" of solid muscle and contained violence. He moved toward me with that fluid grace I'd noticed before, predatory and purposeful. When he stopped, he was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell leather and smoke, and something wild underneath. His eyes held mine, searching for something. "Last chance to walk away," he said softly. "Once this starts, I don't stop. I don't play gentle. And I sure as hell don't care about your reputation or your family name or any of the civilized bullshit you're used to. You understand me." My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst through my ribs. Fear and anticipation tangled together until I couldn't tell them apart. "I understand," I whispered. "Then let's give them a show, princess." His hand came up to cup the back of my neck, fingers tangling in the carefully styled hair that had taken hours to perfect. The touch was possessive, demanding, nothing like Julian's careful, politically correct affection. He pulled me closer, his other hand sliding to the small of my back, and I felt myself melt against him. His body was solid, unyielding, radiating heat that seeped through the thin fabric of my gown. "You sure about this?" he murmured against my ear, his breath hot on my skin. No, I wasn't sure about anything except that I wanted to burn, wanted to feel, wanted to be anything other than the perfect ice queen everyone expected. "Yes," I breathed. He kissed me. It wasn't gentle or exploratory or any of the civilized things I'd experienced before. It was claiming. His mouth moved against mine with bruising intensity, his tongue demanding entrance rather than asking. His hand fisted tighter in my hair, angling my head exactly where he wanted it. I should have been shocked, should have pulled away. Instead, I pressed closer, my hands finding the solid muscle of his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath my palms. The world narrowed to sensation. His mouth on mine, his hands controlling my movement. The low sound that rumbled from his chest when I kissed him back just as fiercely. Then his mouth moved to my neck, teeth grazing my pulse point, and I gasped. His tongue traced the line of my throat, and I felt his lips curve against my skin. "Perfect," he murmured. "Absolutely perfect." Then he bit down. The pain was sharp and immediate, but underneath it was something else. Heat that flooded through my veins like lightning. My vision blurred, and I felt my knees give out. Killian caught me easily, one arm around my waist holding me upright while his mouth remained pressed against my neck. The heat intensified, spreading from where his teeth had broken skin throughout my entire body. It felt like I was being rewritten at a cellular level, like something fundamental was changing. When he finally pulled back, his lips were stained with my blood. His eyes had changed, the pale blue overtaken by something more primal. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, and whatever he saw made his expression shift from curiosity to something darker. "Fuck," he said quietly. "What?" I managed, still dizzy from whatever had just happened. "What did you do?" Before he could answer, chaos erupted around us. The guards at the rope were suddenly struggling with someone. No, multiple someones. I turned, my body still pressed against Killian's, and saw security from the country club forcing their way into the VIP section. And behind them, fury incarnate, was Julian. His perfect hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, and his face was flushed with rage I'd never seen before. Elena clung to his arm, her expression somewhere between satisfaction and concern. "Seraphina," Julian's voice cut through the music. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Killian's arm tightened around my waist, possessive and protective. "I think that's my line, considering she's currently bleeding in my arms." Julian's eyes finally focused on Killian, and I watched recognition and fear flicker across his face. Everyone knew who the butcher was, even in polite society. Especially in polite society. "That's my fiancé," Julian said, though his voice had lost some of its authority. "I'm taking her home." "Your fiancé," Killian's laugh was dark and humorless. "The one you were fucking her sister at your engagement party. That fiancé." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. Alina's face went pale, her grip on Julian's arm tightening. Several phones in the VIP section were now out, recording everything. "Perfect." "How did you?" Julian started. "She told me," Killian interrupted, "right before I marked her." "Marked?" Julian's confusion was almost comical. "He means this," I said, touching my neck. My fingers came away bloody. The bite mark Killian had left was deeper than I'd realized, and even now I could feel that strange heat pulsing through my veins. "He claimed me." "Claimed?" Alina laughed, the sound brittle. "What are you talking about? Sera, this is ridiculous. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene." I stepped away from Killian, though his hand remained on my waist. "I caught you fucking my fiancé 2 hours ago, and I'm making a scene." The phones multiplied. This was better than I'd imagined. The perfect Seraphina Vance, covered in blood and claiming supernatural marking in an underground club while confronting her cheating fiancé and treacherous sister. "We should discuss this privately," Julian said through clenched teeth. "I don't think so." Killian's voice carried absolute authority. "She's mine now. The mark makes it official by our laws." "Your laws?" Julian's laugh was desperate. "She's human. Your shifter bullshit doesn't apply." "Wanna test that?" Killian's hand left my waist, and suddenly he was between me and Julian, his body language shifting from protective to threatening. "Wanna see what happens when you try to take what's mine?" The air in the VIP section changed. Killian's inner circle rose as one, their movements synchronized and predatory. The country club security took involuntary steps backward, suddenly understanding they were massively outmatched. Julian, to his credit, tried to hold his ground. "This is insane. Sera, tell him this is a mistake. Tell him you're leaving with me." I looked at him then, really looked at him. The man I'd been prepared to marry, to build a life with. The perfect politician with the perfect smile and the perfect lies. I'd thought I loved him once. Now I felt nothing but contempt. "No," I said simply. "Sera." I said no, Julian. I don't want your explanations or your apologies. I don't want your perfectly crafted political future or your carefully managed public image. I don't want you. Alina made a small sound, something between triumph and uncertainty. Julian's face went from red to white, his hands clenching at his sides. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "Your family will disown you, your name will be destroyed, everything you've built." "I'm counting on it," I interrupted, echoing my earlier words to Mila. Killian moved then, faster than should have been possible for someone his size. One moment he was beside me, the next he had Julian by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. "She said no," Killian growled, and his voice had changed, deepened into something more animal than human. "That means you leave. Now. And if I see you near her again, if I even hear you've spoken her name, I'll rip your spine out through your throat. We clear." Julian made a choking sound that might have been agreement. Killian dropped him, and Julian stumbled backward, nearly falling. Alina caught him, her expression now purely terrified. "Get them out," Killian ordered, and his people moved immediately. Julian and Alina were escorted forcefully toward the exit, the country club security following quickly. The phones were still out, still recording. By morning, this would be everywhere. The Vance heiress attacking her fiancé in an underground club after being marked by the butcher. I'd wanted to burn my old life down. Mission accomplished. Killian turned back to me, his eyes still showing too much of the predator beneath his skin. "We need to talk." "About the mark." "About everything." He took my hand, his touch surprisingly gentle given the violence he'd just displayed. "My place, now." Is that a request or an order? I asked, testing. His smile was all teeth. Both. He led me through the club, his hand never leaving mine. The crowd parted like water, everyone giving the butcher a wide berth. Mila caught my eye as we passed the bar, her expression somewhere between impressed and concerned. She mouthed, "Good luck." I had a feeling I was going to need it. Outside, a black SUV waited, driver already inside. Killian opened the back door and gestured for me to enter. I hesitated for just a moment, reality catching up with adrenaline. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever had happened in that club, whatever this mark meant, I was about to find out. And something told me it was going to be far more complicated than a simple revenge scheme. Killian seemed to sense my hesitation. Having second thoughts, princess. About which part? Any of it. I thought about that. About Julian and Alina. About my mother's disappointment and my father's political aspirations. About 26 years of being perfect and proper and perpetually unsatisfied. No, I said, and climbed into the SUV. Killian slid in beside me, his large body taking up most of the seat. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing us into the leather-scented darkness. The driver pulled away without needing direction. Where are we going? I asked. My territory, the fortress. He was watching me in the dim light, his expression unreadable. We need to deal with the mark before it settles completely. What does that mean? He was quiet for a long moment. When a primal alpha marks someone, it creates a bond. Physical, territorial, sometimes more. It's not something we do casually, and it's sure as hell not something we do by accident. But you did it by accident, I said, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. Did I? His pale eyes caught the passing streetlights, reflecting them back like an animal's. I knew what I was doing when I bit you, princess. What I didn't know was how you'd react to it. My hand went to my neck, feeling the still warm wound. How did I react? Like you were made for it. His voice had dropped lower, rougher. Like you were mine before I ever touched you. The words should have frightened me, should have sent me scrambling for the door, demanding he let me out. Instead, they sent heat pooling low in my stomach, made my skin feel too tight. I don't understand, I whispered. Neither do I, he admitted. That's why we need to talk. Because that mark, that bond, it's not something I can take back. And it's not something your old world is going to accept. I looked out the window, watching my familiar city slide past. But we were moving away from the glittering downtown, away from the manicured neighborhoods where I'd grown up. We were heading into industrial territory, where the streets grew darker and the buildings more brutal. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out, seeing dozens of missed calls from my mother, my father, various family friends. Text messages ranging from concerned to furious. And already, social media was exploding with photos and videos from the club. Seraphina Vance was trending. The photos were damning. Me in Killian's arms, his mouth on my neck. Me covered in blood, confronting Julian. Me leaving with the butcher while my former fiancé looked like he'd seen a ghost. My mother's text was concise. Come home immediately. We'll fix this. I turned off my phone. Regrets? Killian asked, watching me. About ruining my reputation? No. I tucked the phone back into my clutch. About whatever this bond means, ask me when I know what I've actually agreed to. His laugh was low and genuine. Fair enough. The SUV turned onto a private road, walls rising on either side. We passed through a gate that looked like it could withstand a siege, and then we were pulling up to what Killian had called the fortress. It lived up to its name. The building was massive, more warehouse than home, all concrete and steel and brutal functionality. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, and I could see figures patrolling, all moving with that same predatory grace as Killian's inner circle. Home sweet home, Killian said with dark amusement. It's very fortified. I have a lot of enemies. He helped me out of the SUV, his hand on the small of my back as he guided me toward the entrance. The doors opened before we reached them, revealing an interior that was surprisingly warm despite the industrial exterior. The main room was cavernous, with high ceilings crossed by exposed beams. But it had been furnished with an eye toward comfort, leather couches and thick rugs, a massive fireplace that was currently burning. Art covered the walls, some of it quite good, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves suggested someone here was well-read. "Not what you expected?" Killian asked, seeing my expression. "I expected something more, dungeon-like." "That's downstairs." I couldn't tell if he was joking. Several people emerged from various doorways, all wearing the same expression of surprise when they saw me. A woman with copper hair pulled back in a severe ponytail approached, her amber eyes assessing me like I was a particularly interesting problem. "Boss," she said, her voice low, "what did you do?" "Marked her," Killian said simply. The woman's eyes widened. "You what?" "This is Sera. Sera, meet my second, Bane's sister, and the closest thing I have to a voice of reason. Her name's Kira." "Nice to meet you," I managed. Kira looked me up and down, taking in the blood-stained gown and the mark on my neck. "You marked a human, a Vance, without talking to the council first." "It happened fast," Killian said, though his tone suggested he didn't actually regret it. "It always does with you." Kira rubbed her temples. "The High Elder is going to lose his mind, and Bane," she stopped. "Where is Bane?" "Still at the club, probably terrorizing the new security." As if summoned, the door burst open and the massive, scarred man from the VIP section entered. Bane. His eyes went immediately to me, and his expression darkened. "Tell me you didn't," he growled at Killian. "He did," Kira confirmed. Bane moved toward me with clear, hostile intent, and Killian intercepted him smoothly, putting himself between us. "Careful," Killian said quietly. "She's marked, that makes her pack." "She's a human princess who's been here for 20 minutes and has already brought chaos," Bane snarled. "She smells like privilege and lies. You've lost your mind." "Maybe," Killian agreed, "but she's still marked, which means you don't touch her, clear." The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Bane was smaller than Killian, but not by much, and the violence radiating from him suggested he wasn't afraid to challenge his alpha. Finally, Bane stepped back. "This is a mistake. A human can't survive here, and a Vance sure as hell can't be trusted. She's going to get herself killed or get you killed trying to protect her." "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Killian said. Bane's laugh was bitter. "You mean I'll deal with it? I always clean up your messes." He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Kira sighed. "He's not wrong," she said quietly. "The High Elder already has enough ammunition against you, adding a human mate to the mix." "She's not my mate," Killian interrupted. "Not yet. The bond hasn't fully settled." Kira's eyebrows rose. "Not yet, so you're planning to complete it." "That depends on her." Killian turned to look at me, his pale eyes intense. "The mark creates a temporary bond. Physical attraction, territorial instinct, some sensory sharing, but it fades in a few days if we don't seal it properly." "And sealing it properly means?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Blood and sex," Kira said bluntly. "The mark has to be renewed while you're intimate, 3 times over 3 nights. Then the bond becomes permanent." Heat flooded through me at the image that conjured. Killian in bed, his mouth on my neck, his body moving against mine while that strange heat built between us. "And if we don't seal it?" I forced myself to ask. "Then the mark fades, you go back to your world, and we pretend this never happened," Killian said, but his expression suggested that wasn't what he wanted. "And if we do seal it?" "Then you become part of the pack, my mate, my equal, bound to me until one of us dies." His voice was carefully neutral, giving me space to decide. "No going back, no changing your mind. You'd be giving up everything you were for a life you don't understand." It was insane. I'd known him for hours. I didn't understand his world, didn't know if I could survive it. Everything rational screamed at me to refuse, to let the mark fade, to salvage what I could of my old life. But my old life was built on lies and performance, and a perfect facade that had never been real. And this Whatever this was with Killian felt more genuine than anything I'd experienced in years. "Can I have time to think about it?" I asked. Killian nodded. "You have 3 days. The mark will start to fade after that, and the choice will be made for you." "Where am I supposed to stay?" "Here," he said simply. "Guest room fully equipped and guarded. You're safe within these walls." "Am I a prisoner?" His smile was sardonic. "Only if you try to leave before the bond is resolved. Call it protective custody." Kira moved forward, her expression softening slightly. "Come on, I'll show you to your room. You look like you could use some sleep." I let her lead me through the fortress, up a steel staircase to the 2nd floor. The guest room she showed me to was surprisingly luxurious. A king-sized bed with soft linens, an en-suite bathroom with a soaking tub, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline in the distance. "Clothes in the closet," Kira said. "May not be your usual style, but they'll fit. Bathrooms stocked with everything you need. Door locks from the inside, though I'd advise against trying to sneak out. The guards have orders to keep you safe, which sometimes means keeping you here." She left me alone with my thoughts. 3 days later. The trials had been brutal. The High Elder's assassins came on the 2nd night, masked figures who moved like smoke through the fortress. I'd survived only because Mila, who'd somehow ended up working for Killian, shoved a knife in my hand and taught me where to stab. Bane had tested me in the training room, circling like the predator he was, looking for weakness. I'd used every dirty trick my sheltered life had taught me about reading people, anticipating his moves through body language rather than strength. When I'd finally gotten him in a joint lock, using his momentum against him, he'd laughed. Actually laughed. "Maybe you'll survive after all, Princess." But it was the Syndicate Council that had been the real trial. 12 shifters who viewed me as contamination, led by the High Elder with his zealot's eyes and talk of biological sins. They demanded I prove my worth, prove I wasn't a spy or a weakness. I'd done something they hadn't expected. I'd used the intelligence networks my family had built over generations, the political connections I'd been raised to leverage. Within hours, I'd given Killian information on 3 rival packs, 2 corrupt politicians, and a trafficking ring his people had been hunting for months. "You want to know if I'm useful?" I'd said, standing before them covered in bruises from Bane's training. "I just handed you more intelligence than your entire network gathered in 6 months. I'm not just some rich girl. I'm a Vance. We built our empire on information. Imagine what I can do when I'm motivated." The Elder had looked like he wanted to kill me himself, but the other council members had exchanged glances, seeing potential where they'd expected weakness. Now, on the 3rd night, I stood in Killian's private quarters. The mark on my neck had started to fade, the heat dissipating. In another hour, the choice would be made for me. Killian sat on the edge of his bed, watching me with those pale eyes. "You don't have to do this. I can let you go. Your family's already started damage control, claiming you were drugged or coerced. You could go back." "To what?" I moved closer, my heart pounding. "To Julian's perfect lies, to my mother's disappointment, to a life spent suffocating." "To safety," he said quietly. "To a world that makes sense. Sera, if you seal this bond, you can never go back. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, and that means you're a target for everyone who wants to hurt me. It means blood and violence and a life nothing like what you were raised for." I thought of the past 3 days. The fear, yes, but also the exhilaration. The way it felt to fight beside Mila, to outthink Bane, to stand before the council and claim my place through sheer will. The way Killian looked at me like I was something precious and dangerous at once. "I don't want safe," I said, reaching for the buttons of my borrowed shirt. "I want real." His eyes darkened as I undressed, revealing skin marked with bruises from training, cuts from the assassin's blade, and fatting remnants of his bite. I was a map of transformation, the perfect Sera dying with each scar. "Last chance," he growled, but he was already moving toward me. "Then stop giving me chances and take what's yours." He kissed me like he was claiming territory, hands fisting in my hair, mouth demanding and possessive. We fell onto his bed in a tangle of need and heat, his teeth finding the mark on my neck, renewing it while I gasped against him. The bond snapped into place like a lock turning, permanent and absolute. Mine, he growled against my throat. Ours, I corrected and bit him back. 1 year later. The charity gala was at the same country club where Julian had destroyed my old life. Appropriate. I walked in on Killian's arm, wearing black leather instead of white silk, my hair loose and wild, the permanent mark on my neck displayed proudly. No more hiding, no more performing. The crowd parted with a mixture of fear and fascination. I'd become something they couldn't categorize. Not quite human anymore, not quite shifter, but something in between. The butcher's mate. The Vance who'd burned her family's empire and built something darker in its ashes. Julian stood near the bar, his political career in shambles after I'd leaked every corrupt deal, every backroom promise. Elena clung to his arm, both of them looking diminished. My mother approached, her expression carefully neutral. Seraphina. Mother, I said coolly. You look, well, she couldn't hide her distaste at my transformation. I look free, I corrected. There's a difference. Killian's hand tightened on my waist, a silent question. I shook my head. I didn't need him to fight this battle. You destroyed everything we built, my mother said quietly. No, I replied. I destroyed everything you forced me to be. What I built is mine. I turned away from her, from the life she represented, and walked with Killian through the crowd that had once been my entire world. They whispered and stared, but now it was with respect. Fear. Recognition that I'd become something they couldn't control or contain. Outside, under the stars, Killian pulled me close. Any regrets? I thought of that night in crimson, of the desperate girl in the white gown who'd wanted to burn. She'd got her wish. Not a single one, I said and kissed him. Behind us, the gala continued, the elite clinging to their perfect facades. But I'd learned the truth. Real power wasn't in perfection. It was in choosing your own destruction, then rising from the ashes as something fiercer. I'd come to that club looking to ruin myself. Instead, I'd found exactly who I was meant to be.